I'm now joined by Scott K. Andrews with his fantastic book, School's Out Forever. This looks like a bit of a fat book, but it is actually separated into 3 stories, isn't it? All about the post-apocalypse.
Yeah, it's 3 books I wrote for Abandoned Books Afterblight Chronicles. They're set in a world where there's been a virus that's wiped out most of the population, and the stories that I pitched them were what would happen if a bunch of boys from a boys' boarding school had survived, went back to the school and tried to set up a new society in the ruins. And there's 3 books. They're all quite different because you don't want to write the same book 3 times when you're writing a trilogy. And yeah, they're pretty violent. Hopefully page turners, and hopefully the characters make the violence okay. There is a lot of violence in it, but I think you needed it to sort of emphasise the kind of craziness that's actually going on when there are no more rules, there's no more structure. The structure changes, the children take over, the bullies take over, and it's interesting to see what happens. And you find out that, you know, people like to be led as well. You learn that as well very quickly. I think I was at boarding school myself, and they're very hierarchical places. You do get bullies who rule the roost. You get people who go in there, they're lovely, sweet kids, they show a moment's weakness and they're victims for the rest of their time there. So I wanted to explore that. Also, my villain, Mac, in the first book, he does some really horrible things, and he's a really nasty guy. Crucifying teachers and things. I mean, I was cringing in those scenes. It was making me cringe. That teacher had it coming. I may have based that character on one of my teachers from school. Scott, you've got a dark side. I created this character specially so I could crucify him in chapter 6, and it felt really good. Did it feel good? It did. Oh, that's good. But the problem was, as a writer, having created this character simply to kill him, I had to give him a bit of backstory. Yeah. And in about chapter 3 or 4, I gave him a backstory, and suddenly he was a sympathetic character, and I kind of felt sorry when I had to crucify him after all. So I sort of robbed myself of the full satisfaction of killing him. But yes. Yeah, I felt bad for him because when the painkillers wore off, he was screaming. He was howling. Grim. It's grim how you write, but it has that effect. You need to feel that to actually get involved in the gruesomeness of it. Otherwise, it doesn't work, I suppose. Well, another thing that happens in the book is these kids are in a school that has a cadet force where they're trained to use weapons. They play it being in the army a lot. And one of the things that happened in my school, one of the things that worried me was that you do get this training and these exercises, but the reality of what you're training to do is absent. You're playing with guns, you're playing at being soldiers, and there's no real understanding when you're 14 or 15 that you're being trained by adults that one day you're going to grow up and horribly kill people. Yeah. And that disconnect between the stuff we were doing and the reality of it bothered me when I grew up. Yeah. And so I felt that if there was to be any violence in the books, it had to be quite visceral and it had to be real to show that disconnect between the fact that they're children, but they're in this very violent situation, and that they understand it now. Yeah, and the thing you learn also is that because they're obviously having to do such cruel things, these children, they're like moments where you're like totally shocked at the things that they actually do. The violence, there's also like a brutal scene with the matron that happens in the first book. And I think the thing that I thought actually was that they feel like if they're led to do something, they're not really that responsible because it wasn't really them doing the action, they were ordered to do it. And maybe that happens in the military as well. I was only following orders. Yeah, I was only following orders. It wasn't really me. I didn't have, you know, the decision. I will never accept that excuse. Yeah. And the problem with the book is that the majority of the characters are happy to follow orders if it means they will be safe. Yeah. And the characters who emerge as heroes throughout the book are the people who say, even if it costs me my safety, I won't follow the orders. I'll do what I think is morally right, even if it costs me my life. And that will bring us on to the matron in the second half, but we have to go to the break. Will you join me after the break? I will go. We'll be back after the break with more Major Plans.
Welcome back to Loaded Ladslet, and I'm still joined by Scott K. Andrews with his fantastic book, School's Out Forever. Obviously this is all about the apocalypse, and there's a virus that's wiped out most of the population, and there's only one blood type left, and it's down to all these people to work out the structure of the world after this. Yeah. And you base it on your boarding school at St. Mark's, and you write from experiences, well, not exactly in an apocalypse situation, but it's around the boys.
Sometimes it felt like that. Sometimes boarding school felt like that, yeah.
But the idea is you've got these group of boys who are trying to kind of, you know, fight for power and get hold of resources.
Well, they're not, I think it's really important they're not fighting for power as such. There's a part in the first book where Lee says what he's really fighting for is so that he can just be left alone to read a book,
but they're not
to go and play football, and no one will ever leave them alone.
No one ever leaves them alone.
Adults telling them what to do.
You've got blood hunters, cults running around.
Religious cults, the American army, people traffickers, power crazed, nutters.
And this goes throughout, obviously, the 3 books. You learn about all these strange groups and cults that are like all over the place, never leaving the boarding school alone. Yeah. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Do you think this would actually happen in an apocalypse? Do you think that people would go this crazy?
I don't know. I like to think not. I suspect they probably would.
Yeah, because there's a lot of dark people out there, and unfortunately, if all the rules of society went, you wonder what would happen. People would go power crazed, or
my bad guy in the first book, Mac. He's very clear that the way that they rebuild society is to mirror the way that society grew up in the first place, which is people banding together into tribes that then fight the next tribe to make a bigger tribe and a bigger tribe and a bigger tribe through battles and marriages or however they work it out until there's just one tribe. And what that needs for that system to happen is ruthlessness and a strong leader, and he wants to be that guy. So yeah. There's
one bit in the book where you say, where someone says some towns, some groups have gone back to the 14th century, and you know it sort of goes back to the primitive times when you no longer have the infrastructure that we've so proudly put into place that makes the world work right now. They go backwards.
Rural economies, and I mean, I remember once when I was young and I was travelling to Eastern Europe, and I travelled by train from London right into Poland. It was just after the Berlin Wall had come down. And I fell asleep in Western Germany, and I woke up and I looked out the window and I was in Poland. And it was a very rural area, and there were people strip farming. There were whole families out there behind a horse with a plough. And it seemed like I travelled back in time. And that moment, that transition's always stayed with me. And I felt that a lot of societies would revert to very early stages of development and reflect that.
It's very powerful having children fighting as well. Why did you choose to have children doing it? Do you think it had more impact?
Children can be crueler than adults a lot of the time. I've seen a lot of cruelty from children that you don't see from adults, because they've had the rough edges rounded off them. They've learnt to conform as they grow up. They've learnt to do what they need to do to function in society. You and I, we get on a train in the morning to commute. We might want to horribly stab the person sitting next to us who's got their Walkman on so loud. Walkman, iPod. Showing my age now. But we don't, because it's socially unacceptable. But if you're in a dormitory after lights out, and these are kids who still, they're working out who they are, and someone's being disruptive, then someone else is going to get up and punch them in the face to shut them up. And so I wanted to
You did that very well. And just before we leave, I have to say you have a matron fantasy in this book, which seems to come through in all 3 books.
She's just a character. She in no way reflects my childhood fantasies. I swear.
Was there not a hot matron at your boarding school? Because there is one in here, very clearly described.
There might have been, yes.
And the main character, something might happen.
Matron is very much based on one of my matrons when I was at school.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think everyone has to read more to find out your secret fantasies coming to life.
Let's gloss over that and move on. My wife might be watching.
To sum it up, how would you explain the whole experience of reading this book?
Hopefully it's a real page-turner.
It definitely is that.
I wanted it to be exciting, I wanted it to be thrilling and shocking, but I also wanted it to have something to say about society and about who we are and how we relate to each other. So hopefully it's not just action and adventure.
Well, I was gripped. I only intended to read the first one, ended up reading the entire fat book. See
Brilliant.
how fat that is?
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for coming in, Scott.
Okay.
Take care. And this is School's Out Forever by Scott K. Andrews.